In rock solid software, we're going to talk about what is it that causes our software projects to fail. What is it that causes our software projects to get harder and harder to work within as time goes on? As it turns out, the main driving force in this is change. Unfortunately, we know in software development that change is inevitable and that change is constant. Business problems are moving targets, and so we're constantly having to move what it is that we're doing around to keep up with the business. Unfortunately, our designs aren't terribly resilient in the face of that change. And we know from experience that our designs tend to rot. And so we end up with different design smells in our project. Our project becomes rigid. It becomes fragile. It becomes opaque. We end up with all of this needless complexity and needless repetition. And over time, it gets harder and harder to do the right thing. And so we bolt on even more hacks and even more hacks until we get this big ball of mud that we don't know what to do with. And so in this talk, we're going to go through each of these design smells and talk about how they show up. What they look like, so you'll be able to detect them immediately and know that you need to take some sort of action. And then we'll go through a very small case study and show how a design for even the simplest of problems can, in the face of only a few changes, begin to rot very quickly. But I don't want to just depress you and think that all hope is lost. We next want to find some tools that will help us when we see these smells to actually do the right thing. And so Bob Martin, in his book, Agile Software Development Principles, Patterns, and Practices, he gave us the solid principles. These are principles that will help us to deal with these design smells. The first of those is the single responsibility principle, that a class should only have one reason to change. The O stands for the open-close principle, that classes should be open for extension but closed for modification. The L is the Liskov substitution principle, which tells us that subtypes must be substitutable for their base types. Every important property of that superclass should also hold for the subclass. The next is the interface segregation principle, which tells us that clients of our classes shouldn't be forced to depend upon methods, parts of the interface that they don't use. And the last of the solid principles is the dependency inversion principle, which tells us that abstractions shouldn't depend upon details, but details should depend upon abstractions. And so what we're going to do is go through each of these and look at how we can apply them to our projects. Not only that, when we should apply them to our projects. These principles, much like design patterns, are not things that we should just apply in a willy-nilly fashion. In fact, I'm going to tell you about the principle of taking the first bullet. When you have a change that starts to induce a smell, you then apply the principles rather than trying to apply these principles up front. So I hope at the end of the talk you'll be able to understand and recognize the design smells when they crop up, and to know when and how to apply these principles to make your designs rock solid.